How's it going, guys? So today we have a bike maintenance how-to. We're going to take a look at how to remove and install a mid-bottom bracket. So mid is the general style of, that's what most BMX bottom brackets are, a mid-bottom bracket. And then you'll generally have two sizes, either a 22mm or a 19mm, depending on what the diameter of your spindle is. But we're just going to take a look at how to get a bottom bracket out and then how to put one back in. Now, removing and installing a bottom bracket, it isn't one of the easier things to do on a bike. We will cover some of the easier things like how to replace an inner tube, how to get your grips on, that kind of stuff. The only reason we're doing this video first is because I had this old frame lying around with a bottom bracket in it. So it was just convenient to kind of do this video whilst I still had it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run you through the tools that you'll need to remove and then install the bottom bracket. There's not too many, but I'll just run you through what we're going to need. So the first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need some grease. This is just plain old grease from a bike shop. In a pinch, you probably could get away with Vaseline or car grease or something. All this is just to grease up the bearings so they slot into the frame nicely and you don't do any damage to them whilst putting them in. What we're going to need after that is a hammer to, one, knock the bearings out, and then two, put them back in when we're putting the bottom bracket back together. Now, next we're going to need something to put in the bottom bracket to punch the bearings out. You can either use something like a screwdriver and then hit it on the end with the hammer to punch them out. That'll kind of ruin your bearings. So if you don't want to use the same bottom bracket again, you could use this. But if you are using the same bottom bracket bearings again and you don't want to damage them, you might want to go for something that has kind of a rounded end on it. Like this is just the extension bar from a socket set, or even just a piece of wood. Whatever will do the job, but just make sure it's thin enough to go into the bottom bracket and then kind of push it sideways so it's hitting the bearing. I'll show you that in a minute. Next thing you may want is a chock of wood so that when you're pushing the bearings back in, you're not hitting right onto the bare metal of the bearings. You're using just a piece of wood and then tapping it in like that. Prevents any damage from happening, or kind of minimalizes what damage might happen doing it this way. And the other thing is you may need a file depending on whether you need to file down the bearing spacer that sits in between the two bearings. If your bearing spacer is too big, you might need to file it down a little bit, but we'll talk about that after this. Rightio, so now what we have is we have our bottom bracket here, and what we need to do is we need to punch the bearings out. Now the way that we're going to do that is we're going to insert something. I'm just using a piece of wood. Now the reason that I'm using this is I want to use the same bearings again, just because for this demonstration I don't have another bottom bracket, and yeah, I just kind of want to preserve the bearings as much as I can. Again, if you're planning of putting a new bottom bracket in, you could use something like a screwdriver, but it will damage the old bearings. So if you don't want to keep them, by all means you could do that. But if you do want to keep them, try and be as gentle as possible and use something that has a rounded end and is a little bit less destructive than a screwdriver. But back to the point, we need to get these bearings out. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to put something in like this to punch out the bearings. Now, we don't want to put it straight through like that because you can see it's coming out the end. What we need to do is we need to angle it so that it goes in. And as we can see, it's stuck and it's not coming through. That's pushing on the bearing. And then what we need to do from there is get the hammer and punch it out. So I'll show you how to do that now. Now, one other thing that I should mention is when knocking the bearings out, instead of just doing one big hit at one angle, you're better off to do smaller hits all the way around so it evenly comes back out. Again, if you're not using the bearings anymore, you could do one hit, but it's good to kind of get into the practice of just doing things gently and kind of not smashing the crap out of them, because you really don't want to damage, one, the frame or your bearings. So if you do kind of 4 taps around the outside at different angles, the bearing should pop out relatively easy instead of just doing one solid smack. So again, back to that now. We'll show you how to get these bearings out. So as you can see, we've now removed the bearing by punching it out through the other side. This is the spacer that lives in the middle, that lives in there like that. So we can pull that one out, and then what we can do now is punch the bearing out the same way we did on the first side, but this time we don't have to worry about threading it through the bearing or the spacer. So what we're going to do now is punch the other side out, and we'll go from there. So now that we've got the bearings out, what we're going to do is, if we were reusing these, you'd give them a clean. If not, you'd throw these out. But what we still need to do is give the inside of the bottom bracket on the frame. We need to clean all of that out before we can put anything in there. So what we'll do now is we'll give it a clean just with a rag, and then we should be good to go with putting the new bottom bracket in. Rightio, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take one of our bearings and we're going to press it into one side of the bottom bracket. It doesn't matter what side you start on as long as you get one in. So to do this, what we need to do is grease the inside of the shell. We're going to grease the outside of the bearing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get our bit of wood that we had earlier. Here it is. We're going to get our bit of wood, sit it on top, and then we get a hammer over here. And then we're going to tap the bearing in. It's really important that you don't hit the bearing straight on with a metal hammer. If you had a rubber mallet, you could probably do it without the bit of wood, but I'd kind of err on the side of caution and just still use the bit of wood, because what you really don't want to do is get the bottom bracket in there, think that you've done an awesome job, and then only to find out that you've damaged the bearing whilst putting it in. So just take your time with it. We're going to use the bit of wood, put it on top, and then tap one of our bearings in. So we'll do that now. So as you can see now, we've pressed the bearing in and it's sitting flush with the outside of the bottom bracket of the frame. So it's not raised or flat or dropped down at any point. It's sitting really flush. So what we need to do now is flip the frame, and this is where it can get a little bit tricky. We need to put the right amount of spacers in, and then finally put the other bearing in, and then we should be done. So we're going to flip the frame, and I'll talk you through how we can figure out how many spacers we need to put in. Alright, so what we need to do now is we need to put a spacer in there that is going to hold our bearings apart and stop them from imploding on each other. Now, your bottom bracket kit should come with something that looks like this. This is a spacer. It comes with most bottom bracket kits, and it's designed to sit in there between the two bottom bracket bearings. Now, what we need to do though is find the right size one, because what there is in the bottom bracket, in the frame itself, in the shell, there's a ridge there that just pops out, and your bearing will sit in there and stop at that ridge, and we need to make up the distance in there with a spacer like this. So what you're going to do is you want to put the spacer in, and it needs to meet flush with the top of that ridge there. Now this one's actually pretty good, so you wouldn't need to do anything. Sometimes if it's too small, you need to run little spacers like that, so they'll make up the distance by sitting on top of it like that. Or sometimes if one spacing cylinder like that is too big, you may have to file them down, and that's what the file was for. So you would then sit this on the file and then grind it down until it meets up against that ridge flush. Again, lucky we don't have to do that. So what we can do is we put that in there, and then we just press our other bearing in, and then we should be good to go. So there you have it. That's how to install and remove a mid-bottom bracket for a BMX. Now, there might be a little bit of rattle from the spacer on the inside. Once the crank's gone, the bearings will push in a tiny little bit, and that should stop rattling, and it should be good to ride. If you have any questions about it or you're unsure about anything, leave a comment in the comment section below. If you like the video, be sure to give us a like. If you really enjoy our videos, please do subscribe. There should be more videos like this coming out, other how-tos, whether it be on tricks or bike maintenance and stuff like that. So definitely keep up to date with the channel. But I hope that helped some of you guys out. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Have a good one, guys.